Okay, so here's part 2 of me reading The Velveteen Rabbit. I apologize for crying in the first part. This story is just one of my favorites. It's always been a favorite since of my childhood, and I haven't read it since I was really little, so it just brought back memories of my childhood, which made me happy. So here we go. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a queer way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next minute fat and bunchy. Instead of always staying the same like he did, their feet were padded softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses while the rabbit stared hard to see where the clockwork struck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something to wind them, but he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. "Oh, ho," said the furry rabbit. "It's as easy as anything," and he gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. "I don't believe you can," he said. "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, but of course he didn't want to say so. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all in one piece, like a pincushion. He sat still in the bracken, and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice. "I don't want to," he said again, but the wild rabbits had very sharp eyes. And this one stretched out his neck and looked. "He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out. "Fancy a rabbit without any hind legs," and he began to laugh. "I have," cried the little rabbit. "I have got hind legs. I am sitting on them." Then stretch them out and show me, like this," said the wild rabbit, and he began to whirl round and dance till the little rabbit got quite dizzy. "I don't like dancing," he said. "I'd rather sit still." But all the while he was longing to dance, for a funny new ticky feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give anything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came to so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen Rabbit's ears, and he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. "He doesn't smell right," he exclaimed. "He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real." "I am real," said the little rabbit. "I am real. The boy said so," and he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them, and with a stamp of feet and flash of white tails, the two strange rabbits disappeared. "Come back and play with me," called the little rabbit. "Oh, do come back. I know I am real." But there was no answer, only the little ants ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. There's the Velveteen Rabbit running away. "Oh dear," he thought, "why did they run away like that?" And they stopped and talked to me. For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken and hoping they would come back, but they never returned, and presently the sun sank lowered, and the little white moths fluttered out, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby. but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off and the pink lining of, excuse me. Sorry, I haven't read this book since I was little. The pink linings to his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and the scarcely looked so like a rabbit anymore, except to the boy. To him, he was always beautiful, and that was all the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how much he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real, and when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then one day the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little boy was so hot that it burned the rabbit. When he held him close, strange people came and went in the nursery, and light burned all night. And throughout it all, the Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes, and he never stirred, for he was very afraid, and if they found him, someone might take him away. And he knew the boy needed him. It was a very long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull with nothing to do all day. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy should be very well again, and they would go out in the garden amongst the flowers and the butterfly. Excuse me. The butterflies, and played splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at the picture books, while the rabbit cuddled close to his side, and one day they let him get up and dress. It was a bright sunny morning, and the windows stood wide open. They had carried the boy out on the balcony wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit lay tangled among the bedclothes, thinking the boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it would only remain to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it, and while the little rabbit lay under the bedclothes with just his little peep peeping out and listened, the room was very disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with in bed must be burned. Hurrah! Thought the rabbit. Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside, for the little boy had often talked of the seaside, and he wanted very much to see the big waves and coming in, and the tiny crabs and sandcastles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. How about this old bunny? She said. That? Asked the doctor. Why, it's not a mass of scarlet fever germs, but burn it at once. What? Nonsense. Get him a new one. He mustn't have that anymore. And so the little rabbit was put in the sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish, and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That was a fine place to make a bonfire. Only the gardener was too busy just then to attend it. He had the potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but the next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the whole lot. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with them. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush with real glass eyes, but the boy was too excited to care very much for it. For tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and in itself was such a wonderful thing that he could think of nothing else. And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack
had been left untied and so wrinkled a bit, he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat had worn so thin, threadbare from hugging, that it was no longer any protection to him. Nearby, he could see the thicket of raspberry canes growing tall and close like a tropical jungle in whose shadow he had played with the boy on bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each morning each more beautiful than the other, the fairy huts in the flower bed, the quiet evenings in the wood when he lay in the bracken and little hands ran over his paws, the wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. He thought for a skin horse so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him of what he used was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this. And a real tear trickled down his shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened. For where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground, in a mysterious flower not at all like any that grew in the garden. It had slender green leaves the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves a blossom like a gold cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry and just lay there watching it. And presently the blossom opened, and out of it there stepped a fairy. Okay, I think I'm just going to stop the video here because it's getting quite long, but thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in part 3.